Hello, I'm Harry. I'm going to talk to you about a catalogue we designed for the Serpentine Gallery last year. For the last 14 years, the Serpentine Galleries have commissioned an international architect to design a summer pavilion for Hyde Park. It's attracted some huge names in international architecture such as Frank Gehry and Zaha Hadid. For the 2014 pavilion, the Serpentine Gallery commissioned Chilean architect Smiljan Radic, and it was our brief to work with him and produce a commemorative catalogue for the project. During the familiarisation stage, we were sent Smiljan's process work for designing the final pavilion, in which we found these A6 sketchbooks that proved to be very precious to him and very pivotal in his design. We felt that these gave us a format that would very eloquently communicate his way of working to the reader. Okay, so having defined the format of the publication as A6 to emulate Smiljan's sketchbook, the next step was to define the grid system to work within. This is largely driven by the content of the book. It needed to work with quite text-driven sections such as essays and an interview with the architect, through to very image-heavy sections such as images of the final pavilion and Smiljan's process work. As well as wanting the format to work portrait, we gave ourselves the additional parameter of wanting to include some landscape sections. We felt this change of orientation that he exercised in his process work was another nice feature to bring across into the catalogue. This is one of the more text-heavy spreads of the catalogue. It provides a good opportunity to talk about our chosen typeface. We chose Avenir for its legibility at small sizes, which was of the utmost importance in a catalogue of this size. We also chose it because it's very contemporary without being too clinical, and would sit nicely alongside Smiljan's quite eclectic and expressive imagery. We wanted something that would be almost recessive in that respect. So now with that insight in mind into the grid system and the choice of typeface, I'm going to show a few layouts that illustrate how these defined rules can allow for quite varied sections throughout the publication, from this text-heavy section where we've utilised all 4 columns of the grid to give that desirable line length for continuous reading. We lead into a nice breather section of Smiljan's sketches. These allow for a little respite between reading, but also for the reader to feel part of the journey from his initial ideas through to the final design. We then go into the interview section where we're dealing with type in much smaller bursts, which allows for a narrower column width than we were using before, which we have set up in the landscape format. You'll also see that we have introduced the secondary type size. This is for any information secondary to the main copy, such as figure references or image captions. Actually, that brings up an important point about the machining of the book. Knowing that we wanted this to be section sewn and perfect bound with a hard cover, we needed to be quite wary of the margin left around the spine. Depending on the tension of the sewing, you can quite often lose a portion of the page. So we had a conversation with the printer to ensure that we were leaving enough of a space for these captions in the gutter to be readable. Here are a few spreads from the main essay in the book. We always pay very close attention to typographic detail in any publication we're designing. Settings such as hyphenation and justification and letter spacing are key to finding the appropriate marriage between a chosen typeface and a chosen format, and provide a very pleasing rhythm for the reader. After the essay, we return to Smiljan's journey from his sketches through maquettes, ink drawings and prototypes, and you start to get a feeling for what the final shape of the pavilion is going to be. before finally seeing images of the pavilion itself. This chronology following Smiljan's process was something that we really wanted to preserve in the catalogue. It felt really nice to sort of read everything first and then finally have it revealed to you towards the end of the catalogue as a nice crescendo to the final design. As a final use of the grid towards the end of the catalogue, we have the acknowledgements and staff list and biography of the architect. These utilise the secondary type size that I mentioned earlier and take on a two-column format in order to make best use of the space. And finally, here we've got some images of the final publication to show how it all came together. We utilised a bespoke illustration that Smiljan had created for the cover. This image indicates the scale of the final catalogue. There were a few things we really needed to be specific about in printing. For instance, the stock we used for the text block needed to be very lightweight in order to achieve quite a narrow profile to the book, but at the same time it needed to have minimal show through and also be able to take the imagery and colour and do it justice. We chose to also retain the rounded corners that are a feature of Smiljan's A6 sketchbooks. We needed to be quite specific in the radius that we specified with the printer in order to be as accurate as possible. We also decided, because part of Smiljan's vision for the pavilion was for it to feel almost unfinished and quite rough around the edges, so we chose to expose the grey board within the binding as a subtle nod to these raw materials and his vision for the pavilion. And then finally we have some examples of the final spreads.